Welcome. It is the Run to Daylight podcast. I'm your host, Todd Burrows, Todd from PA, and I am joined today by Matt Schauf of Draft Sharks. I almost said that wrong, Matt. That would have sucked. And we are doing a best ball study hall. And basically, the theory behind this is that, as I was just explaining to Matt, a lot of times you feel like you know things better than you do. And it's so fun to draft that you just start drafting and then you can go 3 months and you're not studying like you should be, Matt.
Yeah, and the reason I'm on here is not only I appreciate all the info that you bring because we've had you on our podcast a few times, but you're one
Yeah.
of the few guys in the industry that pronounces my last name correctly. So I had to come and respect that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I got it right the first time.
That's right.
What do people say?
Oh, they say everything, anything you can imagine. Schauf, Schwaff. I mean, it was much worse when I was younger, and people would call with official calls, and teachers say it on the first day, and I just
Like Matt
answered for
Schwab.
whatever. Yeah, Schof. I
Schwab.
mean, the very first fantasy article that I turned in that was not for the newspaper I was working at, the editor actually changed my name to Schaub in the article. I was like, I'm pretty sure I got my own name correct. I am not the
Yeah.
Falcons quarterback.
Yeah.
You
Like
guys
that,
get
that
into the site.
like I'm sure your editing skills are really top notch, but I don't need you to like edit my name. Um, well, I just kind of think of you as random Draft Sharks dude number two. Like there's like six of you, you're all really good at what you do. And the only one I could pick out of a lineup is Krautwurst.
If I had, the hair in reverse, I think I would probably stand out more as a caricature like Adam does.
Well, again, I started this new concept which is called Bestball Study Hall. And basically, I don't even care how many listeners I get, how many followers I get. If anyone joins in right now, no one is. But basically, I feel like to get better, you have to self-critique, right? You have to know what your own strengths are and what your own weaknesses are. And my weakness is that I love to draft, and studying is kind of a pain in the ass, right? So, what I thought of for this year is to invite people to come study with me, whether it's a guest like yourself or it's the listeners. And hopefully, this catches on. I understand right now people aren't really in off season mode. But the goal that we're going to have you on for the AFC, and we're going to have your buddy Jared Smola on to do the NFC over the next week or two. And the goal here is to just set a baseline of our understanding of these teams and the opportunities. If there's one thing I learned this year, it's that, again, it's opportunity and understanding opportunity. I had a 30% pass through rate in best ball, but I don't feel like I had a real good year in picking players. So I think really digging in and having kind of like a tight group of people who study together, because the worst thing is your biases, right? And my big bias this year were two players, and they both killed me. Well, I had a good year, so they didn't kill me. But imagine with the year that I could have had if I had more than 3% Cooper Kupp, and if I had more than about 4 or 5% Leonard Fournette, right? And the one thing I want to focus in even more this year is being more open to the concept of talented players earning more opportunity. Does that make sense? Like you look at Leonard Fournette, they added Gio Bernard, Ronald Jones was there. It's just so easy to say, what a mess, let me just avoid it. But if anyone was going to break out in that backfield, it was going to be Leonard Fournette. So that's one of the key, I'm kind of laying out, you talk about writing. And oh, by the way, congratulations on your nomination to what the hell was it that you got nominated for?
Best fantasy football article of the year for Fantasy Sports Writers Association. But thank you.
It is pretty cool. What was the article about?
It was the Mike Davis article. I mean, I know that we went back and forth on Mike Davis a bit in the Draft Sharks Discord, and it was kind of like a concept article. I mean, I talked plenty about being
I
against
mean, my
Mike Davis.
concept was that he wasn't going to pay off his ADP.
Right. But and it was even more than just Mike Davis, because writing a big long article about Mike Davis didn't make a whole lot of sense because he's just a 5th round pick. But the thing that bugged me about Mike Davis, and it kind of goes into this stuff, is the concept of just taking the guy that looks like the top guy, even if you don't really like the player and if you don't know the situation is going to be very good. And I always connect him back to Toby Gerhart when he signed with the Jaguars in free agency, and it was a long time ago now. It kind of
I remember
thinking about this.
And I didn't draft him too much because I just didn't think he was very good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that I keep going back to is opportunity is really good, but ultimately if you're not effective, especially at the running back position, they'll find somebody. And I feel like Cordell was kind of hiding in plain sight the whole time,
Mm-hmm.
but we were so trained not to see him that we didn't.
And that's what I want to do more of this offseason is
Exactly.
I mean, there's so much is projecting the players and the teams, and you have to do that. But there is definitely room for thinking. San Francisco is another good example of a backfield. We all look at the 49ers backfield and say, well, I want a Kyle Shanahan running back because that has been a good player over multiple stops. And what, most people did was say, I'll take Trey Sermon at this point. I'll stack him with Raheem Mostert. I'll take both of them. I'll take one or the other. There were a few people who said, I'll take Elijah Mitchell late, but not very many. And that's kind of where I don't think anybody was like Elijah Mitchell's going to be a breakout running back this year, because that wouldn't have been a good take at that point. He was, at least behind Raheem Mostert. But I think that I should have been able to say, if we like San Francisco running backs and we don't know that Raheem Mostert's going to stick it out for a season, we don't know that Trey Sermon's any good yet, then why not stash Elijah Mitchell late? And if he doesn't do anything, I'm dropping him soon. And it's the similar thing to Cordero Patterson. You didn't have to say Cordero Patterson's going to be awesome this year. You could say, well, I don't like any Falcons running back, and here's Cordero Patterson free in drafts, so why not stash him and see what happens? That's kind of the other side, is we seek out opportunity and we just take chances on what might happen with that opportunity. But I also, to the talent point that you were making, that was the thing with Justin Jefferson a couple years ago. And sure, there were people who were bigger fans of Justin Jefferson at fantasy draft time than others, but his ADP was into the double-digit rounds. So there were very few people saying Justin Jefferson is going to go crazy. But we all knew that there was some opportunity with Stefan Diggs gone. We knew that Justin Jefferson was at least a good player. He was a first-round draft pick. So that's another thing where I can look back
and that's the purpose,
that was the mistake,
right?
is not betting on talent.
And that's the purpose of this best. You played perfectly into what I was talking about, and why I want to do Best Ball Study Hall is because it does challenge your biases, right? Mm-hmm. We're not doing content right now. It's turning out to be content, mm-hmm. but we're not. I'm not looking to do content. I'm learning to share my studying and invite everyone else in to do it with me, and to challenge my biases, right? And see, you look for edges in life, right? There's a lot of people who are really good at picking, talent, right? Like I spotted Debo. I got Debo right this year, right? And I went yesterday, and in my best ball tournament, of the teams that I drafted that I had 100% ownership of, what do you think Debo probably had? Like a 20% win percentage, which equates to, like, if you consider pass-through rate, somewhere in the 35 to 40% range is what he averaged. Well, on 16 of those tournament teams, I got 10 of them through to the next round. So I feel like because of everything that I do in best ball, I have an advantage over other people. That when I get something right, I'm going to get it right. And so one of my big things is I always say I don't have more than 23% of anyone. but I can take that 23% and really do something with it when I'm right. So the purpose of all this is to make me better at picking players. And what is my advantage? Well, my advantage is I'm willing to admit what I don't know. And we all joke and we all see the guys on Twitter who are always right. And they can't admit when they're wrong. And you only see their tweets when they're right. And I'm right out there saying, I miss Cooper Kupp. I miss Leonard Fournette. I don't mind saying that I want to do something to help me not do it next year, right? Because if all the other things I'm doing right, roster construction, exposure, blending, supercharging teams with stacks and correlations, if I'm doing all that stuff and I also have a good year picking players, that's when you become dangerous. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And so what we're going to do today. Oh, and that one other thing I wanted to mention that you mentioned, thing that I learned this year. I was down on Akers at his really high ADP. Who knows whether that would have been the right call had he not gotten hurt, right? But the fact was I was fading him, but I didn't have a lot of Henderson. To your point with San Francisco, I was fading Mostert and Sermon because I felt they were being drafted at very optimistically in the 6th and 8th rounds, right? Now, Mostert might have been great had he not gotten hurt. Again, we'll never know. But Sermon was just a busted pick, right? And he was going way too early. I did have some Jeff Wilson shares before he got hurt, but I didn't take. Now, it's harder to take an Elijah Mitchell or a Ramondre Stevenson in Bestball because you really need, especially with 18 roster spots, you really need
something.
It's hard to just throw one away on
Right.
a completely speculative guy, especially if you're only going to draft 4 or 5 running backs. But in season long, to your point, a guy like Cordell Patterson and I guess the point is a guy like Mike Davis, back to your article, I almost had none of him. I was convinced that, yes, everyone who said it looks like he's the guy, he's going to have the opportunity. I just didn't think he had the talent. I was willing to bet against the talent, but my mistake was, I took a few shares of who was that rookie that everyone.
Javian Hawkins.
Yeah. I took a few shares of him. But, we had seen Cordell Patterson run the ball effectively. And you finally got a head coach who was willing to give him the ball. And then the funny thing was, then they turned him into a 2-down back at the end of the year, which made no sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, any thoughts on that before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of guy that I want to figure out why I missed. And I didn't. I took some Cordero Patterson, and he certainly, the few places where I had him, he put teams in contention that otherwise wouldn't have been. And there's, a bit of a line from him to Elijah Mitchell. But yeah, that's my big thing is kind of what you were just saying is if I don't like a guy, figuring out the figuring out the second
Correct.
part of that. If I don't like that guy, then what should I be doing there? And sometimes it's going to be avoiding it altogether. But other times, you take some shots on something that might not work out. It's certainly easier to do when you have roster management in season. But even for best ball, I think there are some spots where we can make it work.
Absolutely. Especially with FFPC moving to 20 rounds. It allows you kind of those 19th and 20th round dice rolls. I feel like what most people are going to do with one of those 2 extra picks is take a third quarterback. I think you're going to see very few 2 QB teams. And I think that opens up some opportunity because I was amazed as when you advance in these tournaments, and I had like 31 teams advance. So I started looking through and I noticed, and even my own teams, where I rarely would take like a Kyler with a Justin Herbert or a Stafford with a Brady. I wouldn't do that often, but almost every team that I did it with did really well this year
Mhm.
because quarterback's still putting up the most points each week. I think it opens up taking two early quarterbacks and not taking, I wish I had the ability to study this because I'm too old and not good with numbers, but how many points some of these late quarterbacks actually score?
Mhm.
Because you see it on Underdog. They show you how many points were actually used for each player.
Mhm.
I think that's a fascinating opportunity for study because I'm pretty convinced the guy who you're going to take as your third quarterback, unless you've waited to take all three late.
Mhm.
And, I feel like if you take two decent quarterbacks, that third quarterback is almost never going to put up points.
And especially now with those tournaments starting early, when we have the back half of the draft, a lot of players who need to land somewhere in free agency, rookies that haven't landed anywhere. It could definitely be even more fruitful to get two early-ish quarterbacks because we know where they're going to be. We know they're going to score and then play around with what you would
And they do
normally
tend to
take
get
down the
hurt
field.
less than other positions in the modern game
Mhm.
because they're so protected. All right, so let's get the screen going. And then I will share my screen. So I think we agree that the key thing is going forward is to challenge our biases. Do you see that pretty good?
Oh, yeah. I feel like I'm in a
All right,
hallway.
excellent. All right, so now I am going to go to the Buffalo Bills and we'll look at them first. All right, so rushing. Devin Singletary got 188 carries. Josh Allen got 122 at 6.3. So Singletary got 4.6. I also have over here some notes that you were kind enough to share. We'll go through those. Only 96 carries, 26 carries. And as your note says, Singletary became the workhorse over the last 6 games. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think they add someone or do you think they say, I think we found our guy now?
I mean, the thought I had today that I didn't have previously was why did it take this coaching staff so long to lean on Devin Singletary, even not as a workhorse, but just as their lead back? It's his third season with the team. I mean,
And he played pretty well year one.
right. It's not
I
like
thought the same thing.
he's been limited, but he hasn't been a schlub. So I don't know why this season it didn't happen earlier. I don't think that he's a workhorse to that level. He had 20.2 opportunities per game over the final 6, including the playoffs. I wouldn't bet on that over a full season. I do think that he showed enough late in the year that they don't have to consider that a priority in the draft now. What we've seen is that NFL coaches often don't think the same way we do. So maybe they look at Matt Breida and Zach Moss not working out and think we need to take an early back to pair with them. So that would be my hesitation. I'm curious to see where Singletary goes in these early best ball drafts. And you know as well as I do, Todd, we don't have to wait nearly as long now to find out how people are going to react. I wouldn't be surprised if Singletary opens draft season at a spot that's too high for my taste. But I'll be curious to see where he settles because there is still some fragility to that role. I don't think he's a true lead back, year over year.
Yeah, but 188 attempts and 50 targets, 40 receptions. That's what makes it very interesting to me. And 7 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns. TDs, as we have found, are the hardest thing to predict. So my initial thought is he's going to start going in the 4th round. Do you think he might go? And let's just keep it to FFPC with the tight end premium. Do you think he's going to go earlier, like 3rd round?
I think 4th round is a good expectation, the receiving obviously helps him. What surprised me most, the workload, was surprising, but more surprising was the goal line work, which he suddenly got at the end of the year after 2.5 seasons of the Bills treating him like he was allergic to the end zone. So if he keeps being their lead goal line back and their lead receiving back, he could pay off at a 4th round price. For right now, for starting out, I'd probably rather grab 2 other running backs in those first 3 rounds maybe and leave Singletary primarily to other people just to wait and see what the Bills do at the position.
Yeah, I think that they're going to bring somebody in, whether it's a secondary kind of guy or someone in the draft. I don't see them spending a 1st or a 2nd round pick on a running back. I mean, this isn't a class where you've got I've watched the top 3 backs. I like them more than I thought I would. But it'll be interesting. My initial thought, and again, we're just doing place setting for now, right? We're just giving our general thoughts. My general thought is with you, but I will, if I was going to play volume early and I'm not, I would mix in Singletary and make sure I didn't miss out. But I would be happy being even or underweight on him, but not by much. And I think that because there is, it's just will be interesting to see if his role, to me right now, he's got a 2nd or 3rd round role, right? So you figure, okay, well, so that's why I'm saying in the 4th round, it's a toss up. If I see him in the 5th round, that's where I think I would start pulling the trigger.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, maybe he keeps getting work along the lines of Aaron Jones. Maybe he's Aaron Jones with a little bit less receiving. My concern is that he's more Myles Gaskin. And, Gaskin looked like a workhorse last year for the Dolphins. And this year it was like, we got to do better than that this season.
Yeah, the only difference is there's a little bit more equity with Singletary. Josh Allen, you mentioned that his pass volume was down. Diggs' volume was down a little bit this year. I faded Diggs heavy in this year. In general, I felt like the Bills were hyper efficient in 2020, and I always end up underweight on hyper efficient teams because often I feel like people are drafting people at their ceiling. It's kind of hard to argue with Josh Allen when you're looking at a guy who gets 122 carries, 763 yards. I mean, that 763 yards, and 6 touchdowns. I mean, that floor is just amazing.
Yeah, you can't get away from a quarterback that runs that much and is successful passing. So even though he came down on touchdown rate and completion rate, he still led quarterbacks in scoring. He's the guy that makes sense as the top quarterback pick that I just don't end up with much because I'm almost never the guy taking that first quarterback.
Yeah, I always tend to be with the guy who was the top guy the year before and had slightly down year. I always remember the year Russell Wilson got hurt and he dropped to like the 9th round on BB10s, and I loaded up. And he didn't run the ball because he was hurt. I do want to look at Josh Allen's completion percentage. Started at 52.8. I mean, you never see this. 52.8 to 58.8. That's kind of normal for a second-year quarterback. That's not that accurate to go from like right around 50 to just under 60. You typically need quarterbacks to be in the 62, 63 range minimum. He had this unbelievable year, 69%, dropped back to 63%. I really feel the 63% is where he's probably going to live for the rest of his career. And the other thing I found in my studying on completion percentage is that once you get through like the 4th year, what you see is what you get. You'll see a bump from year 1 to year 2. Sometimes you'll see a bump from year 2 to year 3, and even a 3rd year of a little bump. And then it pretty is stable from there on out.
Yeah. And I'm not overly concerned. I agree that the percentage that we got this past season is probably closer to what we're going to get going forward. The thing that I guess bothers me a little bit more about his passing stats from 2020 to this season is a dip in yards per pass attempt. And this year's yards per pass attempt lines up with the first 2 years. So if that stays down, it could affect him more. Again, all of this matters less for Josh Allen than it would for most quarterbacks because he adds the rushing. But I think if you just look at the passing stuff, this past season seems more like what we should expect from him than what we got in 2020. And looking at 2020's numbers, they looked like, high point numbers. Quarterbacks don't go over 6% touchdown rate every year unless they're Aaron Rodgers. And even he doesn't do it all the time. But everybody else hits 6%, then they drop down. They spend most of their time below that number. So the whole package is good. I would expect the passing to be down a little bit. Stefan Diggs, you said that you were underweight on him this past season. I was a little hesitant on him because of the big leap, from 5th round ADP to all of a sudden we're all sure he's a top 3 receiver because that's how he performed in his first Buffalo season. What stopped me from being underweight or, opposed to taking Diggs where he was going was that 29% target share that he got in 2020 with the Bills. That is elite target share. If a guy gets that year to year, he's DeAndre Hopkins, he's Devontae Adams in terms of how often he's getting the ball. That dipped a little bit to about 25.4% for Diggs this year. And it doesn't sound like a huge number, but that we're splitting hairs when we're talking about the top wide receivers. And we saw it make him a bit more inconsistent just in terms of what he was getting week to week. So that hurt him versus last year. I'll be curious to see if he rebounds in that category or if we're just looking at more like a 25% target share guy going forward.
So if you look at his 2020 season, 166 targets, 164 targets this year. So he got the targets. Where he really dropped, and it's more than just what you would, in other words, Josh Allen dropped from 69 to 63, but Diggs' catch percentage dropped from 76 to 62, the lowest of his career. I mean, basically, right back to his rookie year. He lived in this middle range in the high 60s for most of his career. I do think that this could regress back up, but that is something, and again, the point of these study halls is to actually take the time and do it, right? To go through everything. His catch rate of 62.8, that jumps out at me.
Yeah, I agree. And it's worth noting that those catch rates that he had in Minnesota was with Kirk Cousins, who tends to be on the higher end of completion rate. So it's quite possible that he moves forward with a catch rate more like what we got from Diggs this past year.
Right. And it kind of makes me less. So, he was going around 111 to 23 last year.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me a little hesitant with him, even toward the end of the second round. I think he's fine if you can get him that late. I don't know that he'll make it that far. Be interesting to see where he comes out. When you look at the overall targets on the team, 164 for Diggs, 112 for Beasley. Sanders had 72, but he missed some time. Knox had 71, and everyone is, going crazy over Dawson Knox. But 9 touchdowns, that could regress. And everyone's going to now be all over Gabriel Davis. It'll be interesting to see if they actually learned and play him more coming up this next year.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a guy.
Yeah, I mean, last year they let John Brown walk, and then they went out and got a new John Brown, which was, of course, an old Emmanuel Sanders. So we'll see whether this year they're ready to let Gabriel Davis be the guy. I would think so. The question is how much that guy gets, because we haven't seen that guy for a full season with Stefan Diggs yet. So I don't know what the ceiling is on Gabe Davis. Jared asked on Twitter today where people thought Gabe Davis would go ADP wise in these early drafts. And Sigmund Bloom answered round 3-4. So Sigmund Bloom is.
I'm not interested in him until we get to double-digit rounds.
Right. I mean, I would say I'm interested in the later single digits. I'm definitely not interested if it's 3, 4, even 5. Especially not this early in the offseason. We have questions left to answer. I mean, Cole Beasley's still around for.
I respect Sigmund, but I don't think he goes that early. Mm-hmm. And again, if you look at it after Diggs, there's not a ton of room for him to get more targets, right? I mean, I don't see if let's look over at the free agents And you see that free agent wise, they lose Sanders and Isaiah McKenzie. Both are unrestricted free agents. So that is kind of interesting.
And there's some speculation that maybe Cole Beasley is a cut candidate, but I'm not going to factor that into my drafting until it actually happens.
Yeah, I'm not going to be drafting a lot of Gabe Davis in single-digit rounds until we get more clarity. I don't think you need to. The talent is certainly there, but I really want to see a pathway to, 100, 120 targets. And I guess if they cut Cole Beasley, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they resign Isaiah McKenzie. I would, put me down for thinking they resign him. They're not losing. Matt Breed is also a free agent, but he's just a piece. I don't know enough about overall salary cap, but just quickly looking, they're not going to cut Diggs. Josh Allen, they're not going to cut. Beasley. All right, let's look at Beasley. So dead cap only 1.5 million, but a 7.5 million cap hit. I mean, that's a pretty big hit when you've got you can pay him 5 million or take a 7.5 cap hit with 1.5 million in okay, I think this is what this means. I think if they wait till after June, he only costs them 1.5. But if they cut him before that, it's 7.5. Does that?
Yeah, and of course they have the tricks at this point where they can cut a guy early and they don't count him until June. Do we know what their cap situation is? Because I think if they're,
I didn't do enough studying on what it should be, but we can look at the active roster and see 125 million. So that to me, 199 with cap hit. I think they have room. Let's see if I can find that.
I think that if they end up needing the cap space, that's where cutting Cole Beasley becomes a possibility. But I don't think that they're in that situation. So until I hear more on that, I'm gonna assume that Cole Beasley's with the team next season.
Well, I mean, it looks to me active. So they're down here with active about 10th. Total cap. Yeah, we need to learn more about how to use this. Maybe we'll have someone on who's better at it. But I think that's a pretty good job on Buffalo. Wouldn't you agree?
I would say so. And it looked like from that chart that they're about 10.25 million under where the cap is for 2022.
But I mean, to me, Beasley's a guy that, he made himself an issue, right? And then they really didn't play him as much in the postseason. I would say that if we're going to lean, I'm going to lean he's going to get cut. I'm going to lean that he's not there next year. Because when you make yourself odious and you're getting older and they can save some money by cutting you, I think, they could just wait and see how the draft goes. And then if you don't get one or two in the draft or in free agency, you keep them. But I'm going to lean that he gets cut.
And before we do get away from the Bills, it's definitely worth noting that they're probably going to be replacing their offensive coordinator for the first time since 2018.
I meant to mention that when we were talking about Singletary. Good call. Very good call.
Yeah, so past
4 years. Hopefully he
Brian
goes to my Giants.
There you go.
Are you a Bills fan? Aren't you all you guys from up that way?
We are all from up here, but none of us are actually Bills fans except for Adam. Adam's the lone Bills fan. I'm an Eagles fan, but at this point I root for my fantasy teams much more than any NFL team.
I've been that way for the last 3 years, but I think it's because I've been so bummed out. Up until about 3 years ago, I'd make my DFS teams and I would mainly watch. I wouldn't watch Red Zone. I'd watch the Giant game, and on commercials I would bounce around. as I watched, the games playing out on NFL.com.
Mhm.
NFL.com somehow got worse. I don't
Yes.
know how it's almost impossible to follow your players on NFL.com now. So I got much more into Red Zone, and the key reason was I couldn't bear to watch the Giants. I don't think I watched more than 20 minutes of the Giants this year.
Can understand that.
Fuck you, Dave Gettleman. Piece of shit.
I mean, the Eagles have been up and down in my time watching them. Even watching the Super Bowl, I wasn't jumping around the living room. I was happy to see it. So I've come to care more about my teams, the ones that I actually have control over. And I still root for the Eagles and hope they do well, but it doesn't affect my mood for the day.
All right. So let's go to the Patriots. And then let me look over here. I'm going to mute for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
I had to yell at my daughter about her noise.
I know how that goes.
You have kids? How old?
They are 15, almost 13, and 9.5.
How old are you?
I'm 41, about to be 42.
I'm 59, and I got a 15-year-old.
Woo!
Yeah.
She must be wearing you out mentally.
Well, I'm raising her by myself these days. I'm not looking at that anymore. All right. All right. So let's look at the Pats.
Mm-hmm.
So Mac Jones, rookie year, only threw 521 passes, 67.6 completion percentage, 22 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. But I got to be honest, I think he looked worse than those numbers.
I think it depends on which game you watch. If you could find games where he looked on, and maybe it was just against soft opponents, and then there were other games where he looked like a rookie, which I guess you're going to get as a rookie. I think overall, I came away, I don't know, I guess impressed based on what he had to work with, because even though they spent a whole bunch of money, they didn't build an impressive passing offense, an impressive group of receivers.
That was
So
the next thing I was going to say. There's just not much talent there.
right.
There's money that was spent. But let's look at their free agents.
Yeah, and all the top 4 guys that they signed last year are certainly going to be around unless there are cuts leaving a bunch of dead money there. But Nelson Aguilar they just signed, Kendrick Bourne, Hunter Henry, and Jonnu Smith all signed new last year. So those guys figure to be around for at least one more, if not 2 more years apiece.
Jacoby Myers is a restricted free agent, so you have to pay him more if you want to keep him. And James White, I find it hard to believe that they will bring him back. I think the one thing that the strength of that offense is the running backs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they missed James White, but to sign him again, unless you get him cheap. I mean, yeah, look at these, the dead cap, 19 million on Hunter Henry, 10 million on Aguilar, 26.5 million on Jonnu Smith. I'm finally broke my Jonnu habit.
Jonnu Smith is just the person that you see out on the dating market and they look amazing. And then you date them and there is just no substance there, I guess, because, we all fell for him with the Titans. Then the Patriots paid him and we're like, all right, clearly they paid him to use him, and nothing. I mean, that was a shockingly disappointing year of usage for Jonnu Smith after signing that big contract. So I'm certainly not betting on him going forward either.
All right, so let's look at the targets. So that's the what? Okay, come on. So 126 targets, 83 catches for Jacoby Myers. That has to be the quietest 83 catches I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, mostly because it took him nearly all year to find the end zone. But yeah, I mean, look at the guys that they signed and all the money they threw at him. You spend more than $100 million on those four players, and then Jacoby Myers gets 51 more targets than any of the new toys you brought in. So that shows me that they realize they misjudged all of the talent that they signed this offseason, except maybe Hunter Henry, but definitely
I
the other
don't think
two.
they honestly. I think that Belichick saw Brady win a Super Bowl and said, "I'm old and I want to compete this year," and they just took. I mean, they're you hate to say it, and there's a lot of people saying after they got blown out that Belichick is toast. I don't think he's toast as a coach, but I think he certainly has been bad as a general manager. Hunter Henry got 75 targets, 50 receptions, 9 touchdowns. He could be overdrafted this year because of those 9 touchdowns. Kendrick Bourne is an interesting guy, a guy that I had a ton of on Underdog as like my 18th round wide receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Because and he paid off nicely. The strength of the
Extremely
team,
efficient, though, like way over efficient.
yeah, yeah. But a lot of that is because of he's very talented.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, only when he gets an opportunity. So here's the most interesting thing: 202 rushes for Damian Harris, 133 for Ramondre. Just you know, I think Harris. I think Ramondre has an opportunity to beat out Damian next year. But with both of them back, I think it's going to be hard to settle on one of them.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's what we saw when they were both healthy. The carries per game are a little skewed by guys missing time back and forth. But I mean, I think 13 and a half carries per game for Damian Harris, 11.1 for Ramondre Stevenson, probably a pretty fair way to expect things to break down between them, because the Patriots, should have incentive to run both of those guys. They're better at running back than they are at the pass catching positions. So why not keep running the offense the way that they did the past 2 years? And obviously, with Cam Newton gone, they didn't go nearly as run heavy, but they were still 27th in neutral situation pass rate, 45.9% of the time they were passing, which is only a little bit less than 3 percentage points up from where they were with that Cam Newton offense. I think we should expect more of that, and it certainly makes all the pass catchers even less attractive than they are on their own.
Yeah, and see, here's one of those situations that we were talking about in our opening. You see both of them, and therefore neither one of them seems that interesting. But especially Ramondre, I'm going to be very interested to see where his ADP is. If it's in double digits, I think that you then get a floor that is worth it. And then if Harris goes down, you can crush.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be very interested in both of these guys, mixing them in to my best ball teams. Because I don't think you're going to see any new running back, with so many other holes. It doesn't make sense for them to draft another running back. And if they do, he'll probably be a later one. And I think Ramondre showed upside above what Harris has. But my point is, I think both of them have a decent enough floor once you get, to that 9th, 10th round. And then if one of them gets hurt, that's when you could in fact, I wouldn't be opposed in best ball to drafting them together, depending on the ADP. And I think most weeks you'll get one of them giving you a floor game. And then if one of them gets hurt, I call it stack cuffing. And I only do it when you can get two guys later. So the only stack cuff I was interested in this year was Edmonds and Connor, because I felt that both of them had a decent enough floor at their ADP. And then one of them did get hurt and Connor went nuts for a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I was actually going to ask you that exact thing. I would guess that these guys will settle in at least in early drafting when there are so many unknowns. I would bet Damian Harris is somewhere around round 6 or 7, and Stevenson is around round 9, because Stevenson did show quite a bit, but going back to the preseason, and I think that there are others that will share your opinion that he has at least a shot at beating out Damian Harris when both of them are on the field. But I like the idea of putting them together, especially if you took one running back earlier, maybe two, and you fill things out with this duo. And I agree that the time that you do that with two teammates at running back in a best ball lineup are when one of them's not a zero, when you're getting something from them, even when they're both healthy. And then, an injury to either one can catapult the guy that's still healthy.
Yeah. So, and that's typically a stack cuff for me is typically when you can get the first piece in the 6th, 7th round and the second piece in the 9th, 10th round. Yeah. And what activates it for me is when I take that first guy, because again, if Harris is going in the 6th round, most drafts, I'll leave him alone. I think there's way too much, way too many other guys I'll probably be interested in there. Wide receivers that I know I can get every week that are going to be on the field. But occasionally he'll drop to the 7th round. So that's when I'll take the discount. And then I will look to take Ramondre in the 9th or the 10th and kind of double down on the discount that I got on the first guy. That's kind of how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then with volume, you end up with, 6, 7, 8% of a guy, maybe 9 or 10, but you've got it at a discount, and then you've supercharged it so that you have some really nice upside as well. So that's kind of how I play it. If you want to look at something that I do, anybody else on this team? Let's look at your notes. 27th, you mentioned in neutral pass rate, 31st. Mac Jones obviously throws more when they're behind. Second most points at position, of course, fantasy.
Yeah, so that's a reason to look at taking both of these guys. Is the Patriots the only team that collectively scored more fantasy points at running back than the Patriots this season were the Colts, which obviously had Jonathan Taylor. So behind them, no other team had more running back points than the Patriots.
I could see them adding a long-term James White replacement, whether it's somebody that they look at on the free agent market or somebody who I don't think they're going to want to give Brandon Bolden 41 receptions next year.
Yes, I think Brandon Bolden is always a fallback for them. By the way, I checked Underdog ADP, and right now Damian Harris is at the 5-6 turn, and Ramondre Stevenson is mid-round 8.
So right where you thought they would be. Now, I think you need to drop on FFPC because tight ends go earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and can you send me how I can find, how do I find that? So
on Underdog,
let me pull up Underdog.
Came up for me because I've looked at it lately, but if there's a rankings tab, that'll take you. Actually, I believe that's how you do it. You go in.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Well, you can see my screen, so you can. All right, it's not letting me in. I fucking hate that. All right, let me try this browser. No, I've logged in on this browser. So where would I go?
So right. when the site comes up, I think it's the
Have you noticed this website? Have you noticed this site going exceedingly slow lately?
I haven't been on it on desktop as opposed to phone lately.
Yeah, but even on phone, it was like really lagging yesterday.
Actually, the app has been loading slow for me.
Okay, so this is just playoff. See, that's what I was thinking. I don't see where
if you click NFL 22 early best ball, it'll give you the
Where would that be?
Right where your cursor
Oh, I
is.
see it.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, good. All right, good. Excellent. Good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So I think that does it for the Patriots. Let's move. I just knocked myself out. Can you hear me?
I got you back.
All right. So let's go to the Dolphins. 9-8, new coach coming in. All right. So Tua Tunga my balsa. Took a lot of heat. Only 388, but he was hurt. 67.8 completion percentage, which is very good. 16-10, which isn't too bad. Yards per attempt, 6.8. Yards per catch, 10.1. He took 20 sacks. What are your thoughts on Tua?
I think he would look better if he didn't get drafted right ahead of Justin Herbert. But overall,
And that's a pet peeve of mine because nobody was drafting Herbert over Justin Herbert.
I was Team Herbert that year, I have to say, and the receipts are on DraftSharks.com.
Oh, I believe you. I just didn't follow you enough. All right.
Well, Tua, though, my take on Tua is that he's just going to be a neutral fantasy quarterback going forward. I don't think, even real life wise, I don't see him raising or lowering the level significantly of the receivers that are working with him. He's kind of, I don't know, Kirk Cousins-ish, I guess, but with likely less completion rates, maybe a little bit less than Kirk Cousins for me. Maybe Derek Carr.
All right. So this is a team where I think, when you look at the attempts, Gaskin got 173, but I don't think he would have even had that many if you hadn't had injuries to Malcolm Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I here's a spot where I think you're going to see a running back added, maybe two.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it late in the year. They were hurting so much. They wanted another option at running back so much that they wound up giving Duke Johnson 14 carries a game. He led the team. He only played 5 games, but he led the team in carries per game for the year.
Yeah, I think that it was frustrating. I didn't draft much of Duke. I did in some 28-round best balls.
Mm-hmm.
And all year I saw him go here and not get a chance in there. I mean, for years we've been saying that Duke Johnson is better than just a third down back, and then he couldn't even get a job as a third down back. And even there, he only got 5 targets on the year. Gaskin got 63. I could see Gaskin being there then. I could see them drafting like a guy who's going or free agency, them bringing in somebody to be a first and second down back. It looks like they believe in him. Again, we got a coaching change coming, but 63 targets is pretty good for a part-time guy.
Yeah, he's going to be a guy who's part of it, but I think that we got to see over the second half of last year where it's going to be new leadership, so we'll see what new guys think, but I think that's where he belongs. I think he's much more this past season and second half Myles Gaskin than he was 2020 Myles Gaskin.
All right, so they brought in Will Fuller. We didn't do that. Let me just go and look at the free agents.
Yeah, Will Fuller's on a 1-year deal. I think that Devontae Parker's signed beyond this season, and Mike Gesicki, I believe, is hitting unrestricted free agency in March.
Yep, Fuller, Albert Wilson, Mac Hollins, and Preston Williams, and Gesicki. No, Gesicki's UFA.
Mm-hmm.
So all the more you're going to this is a team I don't see Parker, but I mean, can the guys stay on the field?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at overall salary cap. They do have some room. $67 million. So I would not be shocked to see them be pretty active with some trying to give Jalen Waddle some friends.
Mm-hmm.
140 targets for Waddle as a rookie. Only thing is concerning is this 9.8 yards per reception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would like to think that that extends going forward. Even if it stays in that range, I think we'll take a more electric Cole Beasley there. 24.3% target share for Jalen Waddle, roughly in his rookie year, I think is impressive, especially given that they worked with a couple of different quarterbacks. So he did better as a rookie than I was expecting him to do. I think it's encouraging for his future. Devontae Parker, nobody's going to like him, which makes him more attractive as a draft target, not target necessarily, but somebody to mix in because he's going to be in the double-digit rounds because nobody's excited to draft him. But 7.3 targets per game each of the past 2 years. So even when he misses time, when he's on the field, he'll probably get the ball a decent amount, especially with all the guys that are set to leave town.
He's a guy that I start being interested in. That's the kind of guy that, there normally are rookies with a lot of upside in that range, 12th, where he went last year, 12th to 14th round. If you start finding him in the 15th to 18th round of drafts, yeah, that's when those guys who no one wants to draft, when they end up down there, that's when I will take them. Jalen Waddle going ahead of DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen and T. Higgins and Mike Evans, that's a little rich for my blood.
Yeah, I think Waddle's probably going to be going a little bit early for me to be, hyper interested.
Yeah, I had a lot of them this year, and I do think he has the ability to be a downfield threat and be more than a 9.8 yards per catch guy, but I don't know that he could do it with Tua.
Yeah, I mean, Tyreek Hill was the short range guy in his rookie year. And I think Jalen Waddle's probably closer to Tyreek Hill than anybody else that we've seen come in since Tyreek Hill. But I agree with you. He doesn't have Patrick Mahomes. So I think that's going to keep him from totally unlocking that ultimate ceiling.
And the ultimate thing about when you draft a guy and when you fade a guy is, what's the chance that he crushes you? Right? The only way he crushes you is if he crushes DK Metcalf and DeAndre Hopkins and Keenan Allen and T. Higgins and Mike Evans, right? If he ends up, scoring 300 points when they scored 200, then it really hurts you. Mm-hmm. If he scores 300 points and they score 270, the fact that you faded him is not going to matter. Mm-hmm. So my initial thought anyway is that Waddle is going a little high for my blood. It's kind of, he's kind of the cool toy that you should have had last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm leaning away from mid-third round Waddle.
Yeah, I mean, if I see him in the 4th, 5th, absolutely.
Yep.
But DeAndre Hopkins in the 4th, 5th round, well, he's not quite there yet. But in FFPC, if he's going 34 here, I think you will see him in the 4th round in the FFPC.
Especially in the early tournament that's going to be starting up soon.
Yep. I asked for that, and I think that's why they did it. But because at first, when I mentioned it to him, he goes, "Send out a poll and let's see what happens with it."
I mean, people still call their rankings this time of year way too early rankings, and obviously everything's going to change, but it's not way too early anymore. People are drafting.
And I did all that looking, and because I left, you guys couldn't even follow what I was looking at. Let me go back and share the screen again. So I was looking over here, and that's where I saw Waddle between Metcalf, Keenan Allen, some of these guys. All right. Anything else on the Dolphins?
I don't think so. They have some questions to answer with guys that are coming up on free agency and what they're going to add and who's going to be the coach.
Yep. I don't see any advantage in taking some of these guys. I do think Mike Gesicki's interesting. I want to look at his ADP because not knowing where he's going, Yeah, see, he's going 108th. So that is ninth round. That's still not great.
Hmm. Yeah.
Going ahead of Noah Fant, Zach Ertz, and Hunter Henry and Higbee. So, I mean, he's going right around where he should go, even though you don't know where he's going to end up.
Yeah,
So I'm not.
we were doing some of these 2022 drafts with me and Draft Sharks guys, and I think Gesicki's kind of in the range where he belongs. And if he slips, if I pass on a tight end and a few other guys go, I'm interested because I think he'll land somewhere with somebody that wants him, whether it's Miami or somewhere else. But there's nothing special in his value ahead of Noah Fant or even Hunter Henry.
Yeah, and I will not be drafting any Rob Gronkowski until I hear he's coming back.
Agreed.
There's no point in taking him in the 8th, 9th round. Again, the question you have to ask yourself is what do you lose if you don't take him? And I don't know that he can stay healthy enough to crush you, versus the chance he doesn't play at all.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's finish up with the. Let's just look at your notes on Miami. But again, it doesn't matter because we don't know who's going to be there.
Yep.
But 8.75 targets a game, 24.3, 18.2. Good call on the Devontae Parker thing. This is really good stuff you put together. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
All right. I like Robert Saleh.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're going in the right direction. I think they played really hard for him. And I think that's what you really look for in a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got plenty of draft capital. And let's look at their cap. They've got plenty of cap room. $47 million. And let's look at their free agents. Crowder's gone. Keelan Cole, Berrios. I think that Berrios, they might try and re-sign Berrios.
Mm-hmm.
I also wouldn't be shocked to see him end up in New England, or wherever Tom Brady goes. He's like, and I've been saying it earlier. He's got that skill set that you look for that Edelman role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right down to the kick return.
Tevin Coleman is gone too. All right. What are your thoughts on Zach Wilson? I mean, I've got people on my timeline saying he's already a bust, give up on him. 55% completion percentage. He did cut out the turnovers late, which I thought was, but only 9 touchdowns. I mean, I didn't like the pick to begin with at number 2. I liked other people more, but he was the guy who went.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm starting out opposed to him too. I thought Justin Fields should have been the second quarterback taken in that draft. I don't know. I'm also not going to call him a bust already. I think it's kind of silly to call anybody a bust. I mean, if he's a bust already, then Trevor Lawrence is looking busty as well. So that said, I think I tend to think of it in fantasy terms more than reality. And I don't think that the upside for Zach Wilson is going to be that significant a fantasy factor either for him or for his receivers. He's got the arm and he's got some mobility to surprise. So, I'm not saying unload him if you have him in a super flex league, in a dynasty league, in whatever format, but not somebody that I'm excited about down the road. I do think he could be fine, but I'm not excited.
Michael Carter, 140. I mean, this is about what I thought he would get. 147 attempts, 36 receptions. 9.0 yards per reception is not bad for a running back. 4.3 yards per carry. And what I tend to look with yards per attempt is more, how does it compare to the rest of the players on the team, right? I'm not concerned if a guy is 3.7, if the whole team's 3.5. If I see a guy, I'd rather have a guy who's 3.9 versus a bunch of 3.5s than a guy who's 4.7, but the team average is over 5, right? But the eye test, I just wasn't that impressed with Michael Carter. Let's look at his ADP. What are your thoughts on him?
I think he's fine. And that's what I thought heading in. And that's what I think he's going to be going forward. He's RB23 right now. And I wonder if he's going to stay there, because it's kind of a tough time to really gauge running back, because we have none of the rookies in there, because we have lots of questions to answer outside of the top, I don't know, 20. I guess even down beyond him, there are still questions to answer. So if he sticks at RB23, he's going to be somebody that I'm not aggressively adding, but also not somebody that I'm totally avoiding. I think he'll wind up being the top fantasy back for the Jets. I just don't think he's going to end up being a difference maker across fantasy formats.
I think they're going to bring in someone else. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Spiller, who reminds me of a young Tevin Coleman with even more acceleration, good hands. I know that Carter's supposed to be that third down back, so they could go with a different type of running back. But I clearly see them adding another running back. Ty Johnson did nothing. Did we look over here at the running back?
I think the upside on Michael Carter is that he settles in as Chase Edmonds, a healthier Chase Edmonds, but Chase Edmonds.
Yeah, and I don't see that kind of burst that I see with Chase Edmonds, I guess is my point. He's fine. I mean, he's fine, but I just don't see the explosive upside that I like to see from a guy who's a little bit undersized. That was my takeaway. Am I crazy?
I don't think so. I mean, he's fine. I'm not. If somebody tells me they love Michael Carter,
he's fine, but he's a I liked him coming out, but all right, let's look at targets. And it was such a mess because no one played. Yards per reception. So this is really interesting. So Elijah Moore, 12.5, Corey Davis, 14.5. I mean, I kind of like that from Elijah Moore for 43 receptions, 538. Where's his catches per game? You had some notes.
Yeah, so over
they
his
were 15
final 5 games.
What's that?
Oh, I was going to say over his final 5 games, he really started consistently playing more often. And over that span, which of course ended in week 13 with his injury, he averaged 9 targets, 5.6 catches, 78.4 yards per game, and a touchdown per game over that span, 22.5% target share. So we'd like to see a little bit more than that going forward. But I think overall, that stretch is encouraging. Now, the downside for his fantasy outlook is that many of us were excited about Elijah Moore heading in. So we were all looking for reasons to get excited. So you're not going to get him at a value at any point in draft season, as I can see you're looking up right now.
Yeah. So ADP of 61. And then let's see where Corey Davis is. Still looking. See, I would much rather draft Corey Davis at 122.
Yeah. That's the cold hard truth of this draft game. You can love Elijah Moore, but if everybody else loves him, you gotta not love him as much.
Yeah, and I think he's fine, right? Like he's going around Pittman, Cooper, Devonta Smith, and Michael Thomas and Brandon Cooks. I mean, I kind of like him less than a bunch of those guys.
He's not somebody that I want to totally avoid, even in that range.
No,
I do think that there's explosive upside still, but
I do too.
He's also not somebody that I can aggressively chase in that range because I agree. He could very easily next year could be Devontae Smith's year more than it's Elijah Moore's year, or maybe Michael Thomas goes back to being Michael Thomas, or maybe Brandon Cooks just continues to be Brandon Cooks, and all those guys end up looking better than Elijah Moore for fantasy this season.
So here's the thing. His catch percentage was 55.8. Corey Davis, who had more yards per reception, 57.6, 70% for the slot guys. So, I was talking about this. Zach Wilson at 55. I don't expect him to get much more than 60 next year, if that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You normally don't see a huge bump in the second year. You do see a better completion percentage. But you could also see them playing from behind less if they do the right thing and put, they need to put some weapons on that defense.
Mm-hmm.
Any sleepers here that we might? No, I don't think so.
No.
They definitely need a tight end.
Yeah. That whole roster.
The Jets are definitely another year away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, would you be shocked if they were 6-10, 6-11 next year instead of 4 and whatever?
No, I think that's reasonable. And then, maybe there's a little upside beyond that, depending on what they do and what kind of leap Zach Wilson makes. We'll see. I mean, he's talented, but yeah, not a team that I'm excited about for real or fantasy purposes.
All right. So we studied the AFC East. Any final comments?
I think that's it. I mean, it's not an overly exciting division right now for fantasy, but there is room for some big changes to be made. So, we'll see what the Jets add. We'll see what the Dolphins decide to do with their pass catchers. We'll see where these rookie quarterbacks go. My big thing is to not assume that I know too much about what's going to happen next year with these rookies or with anybody that did something different than what I expected this past season.
Huh. I forgot to shave right here. Got like a little Hitler thing going.
Nice little salute.
A little. Got to get rid of that immediately. You don't want a Jewish guy with a. Anyway, thank you. I found that very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I always like talking through and thinking through this stuff, so I appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Yep, and we'll probably get another one in this week and get to another division.
Sounds good.
All right, that's going to do it, guys. Thank you for either coming along or not coming along and watching, but we are determined to be better next year, and you're welcome to come along. Have a good day.